Hi, my name's Jim, and today we are going to discuss how you can block websites like Facebook, and this requires an intermediate level of skill and some background with DNS and web server. So the basic idea here is you're using too much social media and you want to block it. And yes, you could use parental control software on each computer. To me, that seems like a bit of hassle if you have quite a few computers. So this might be useful for someone who's like a sysadmin. And the idea here is to have a centralized block. No need for that parental control software. And this should run on a router. It'd be best to run on a router. A Linux-based router would be suitable. DDWRT, you might have to cross-compile some of this software, this open source software, or take parts of it, take it to this platform. I haven't done that yet. What I'm doing right now is running this all on a VPS, so it's a remote server, not an access from home. But for those of you who don't know, normally this is just a very basic breakdown. But when you go to a site like Facebook, what your computer does is it goes through your internet connection, through their routers, to their DNS server. That DNS server, your computer asks, what is the IP address of Facebook.com? It responds back to you, your computer, the IP address of Facebook.com. Your computer then makes a routing decision on how to get to Facebook based on its IP address that was handed back from the DNS. It goes, based on that routing decision, back up to the ISP. The ISP then routes it through their routers, goes off further into the internet or to Facebook. Okay, that's the basic idea. Our setup, however, we use our own DNS, okay, on our own network, or VPS, in my case VPS, but this is just a simplified diagram. It goes to our DNS, and if we have a zone file, if it's blocked, it gets, our DNS comes back. If that domain is blocked in our DNS for that domain responds with our web server's IP address, okay? It displays a blocked message to the computer, the browser on the computer. Firefox, Internet Explorer would then see a blocked message from our web server impersonating the Facebook server, okay? It's perfectly legal to do this. You can do whatever you like, it's your network, okay? Whereas if the site was not on our blocked list, on our DNS, it would go off to the internet to the actual other sites that you allow. Wikipedia, for example. So basically the requirements for this are DNS. Named is what I'm using from part of the bind package. And web servers such as Apache. Both are available Linux, Windows. I like to run mine on a VPS right now, so I'm using a VPS I found on Low End Box. You can get them anywhere from like $20 to $40 a year, $5 monthly, depending how you want to do it. Now, both we've mentioned this. So in the example here, we're going to have our own DNS web server on the same server. You could use separate servers. The web server and DNS server don't have to be the same machine, don't have to be in the same room, but for this I have them on the same VPS, and the VPS IP address I have is this, so that will be used in the configuration files. And we can skip all this. That's what I've just mentioned. So the first step is configuring the DNS, and DNS has things called zones, and zones are the settings which hold, amongst other router types, the IP address or the routing number for a domain and its subdomains. So your computer asks the DNS, what's the routing number, how do I get to Facebook? The DNS responds with the routing number for Facebook and makes its decision on how to get there based on that number. Then, so what we have to do is configure a zone for each of the sites we wish to block. Okay? But first we have to declare that we're going to host that zone, that we are going to be authoritative for it. And then we have to configure the actual zone file, okay? So the named.conf tells the server which domains we are authoritative for, and the zone file has the routing numbers for the domain, amongst other records. So in the named.conf, all you have to do is add a line to your named.conf file that says zone facebook.com. That's the domain name that you want to be authoritative for. This is the domain name you want to block. And you say it's a master domain. You're not going to get information for it from anywhere else. It could be master or slave. Master means that's the master copy. And then the file on disk in your var directory, that's going to be facebook.com.zone. In my case, I have things called views that have different zones for different source IP addresses. So if I do it internally from the VPS or from home, there's different views, gives out different IPs. Let's just focus on the external zone. You know what, I did not give myself permission here. Just load this up. Okay, and what we will do here is so what we have, just look at our external view and you see there's the different zones, okay? These are the sites I don't like and want to block: Twitter, Facebook, 4chan. This one I'm not blocking, but it has a zone for external viewing. But here, let's take a look at the facebook.com one. And you can see here, you have different records and their values, okay? This is the domain name, facebook.com, for which we have the records. These are the records. Don't worry about this one, this is for zone transfers. It's a whole different subject. All we're concerned about right now is pointing facebook.com, request of facebook.com, to the IP address of the web server. That's this here. This is the IP address of the web server. This is the domain name of the web server. So this here symbolizes the domain name we want to block, facebook.com. This references this. This, however, is the wildcard, so it would match any subdomain of facebook.com, such as www.facebook.com, and that will always point it over to techyes.net. Techyes.net then resolves to this same IP address. But what you could also have in here, instead of this, you could have this right here, where you just point to the IP address of the web server. Instead of that CNAME alias, techyes.net, you could just go directly. Instead of this, you could have this. Okay, so instead of this, you could have this. If you don't have a domain for your web server, you just put in the IP address of the web server. So that covers all subdomains such as www.facebook.com, and this one covers all just facebook.com itself. Okay, both requests to your DNS will return this number to your web browser. Your web browser then will take the address that you put into the address bar and then connect to this IP address and request that address, the URL, in the address bar. Okay, so that's where the web server comes into play. And the web server is configured with this thing called virtual hosting. It's straightforward. And basically with the virtual hosting, you just set up virtual host commands. Now, one could just go with a global error document file. So for any website that this web server does not recognize itself as holding, it just return this error right here. There's also a thing called like a fallback request, but this version of Apache does not have it. Let's see if we can find that on Google. Fallback resource. You could always configure fallback resource so when a file is not found it just goes to that. This version of Apache does not have it, using an older version, but it is secured according to Red Hat. But anyway, you do virtual host. If you want to have customized pages for each website that you want to block, you would create a virtual host for each one. And then, unlike the way I have it configured, you would change the document root. You could change it to, for example, this is Twitter. You change it to var.www.twitter.com. And inside there you'd have your index file. And by default, that's the file it would access when the web browser requests from your server twitter.com. Or let's go back to Facebook. Say if the way this is set up is when your browser requests facebook.com from your web server's IP address, it says, hey, I'm Facebook. My virtual host name is Facebook. Okay? It'll also answer to www.facebook.com. It'll respond to no.facebook.com, any subdomain. And when it does receive a request for either of these, the wildcard facebook.com or facebook.com itself, it will go to the default, which is index.html, and display that content. And if you request something else that's not found on that in that directory, it'll give you the default file back again, index.html. Okay? So if you request something that's not there, it'll give you index.html anyway. That's the 404 not found file. But in this case, what I have here is each virtual host goes to the same document root because they're all getting the same index file. They're all being redirected to Wikipedia at this point. That I'll get to in a second. But the basic idea here is you have a virtual host listening on all your IP addresses on port 80. Their default files are taken from the same directory. Their default file is index.html, whether if it exists or not. Here you have the server name that you want to block, as well as the wildcard. So once again, if your browser tries going to facebook.com, your computer will ask the DNS, the stub resolver will ask your DNS, what is facebook.com, the DNS sees that it has a zone file for facebook.com, pulls the record from there for facebook.com or the wildcard. That gets mapped back to the IP address of the web server. The web server then sees the request in the URL for facebook.com. It knows that it has a virtual host for facebook.com and then pulls the index file from its own web server. It does not forward it to actual Facebook. So let's see it in action for now. Try going to facebook.com. Facebook.com is a waste of life. Prepare to be redirected. And you get redirected to Wikipedia. Okay? But say if you wanted a custom one for each website. Remember how I said there's that document root for each virtual host. So we'll change the document root to facebook.com for another custom website I made for facebook.com. You know, I may have deleted it. I hope I didn't. No, I still have it. Okay, so we'll try refreshing. It's cached still. Let's try refreshing this. It's still doing that. Okay, so I think what I have to do here is service let's try this again. Oh geez. There we go. Zuckerface is a snitch. here's just an old quote where Zuckerface called all his users dumb fucks. Excuse my language, but that's just a quote, saying that basically anyone who joins his site is a dumb fuck. So, you know, if you're a dumb fuck, go on Facebook. If you're not a dumb fuck, stay off Facebook, because this guy's a snitch. Okay? But basically, if you have any questions, if you want to set up something like this for yourself or work on like a router, oh yeah, and you could put anything inside the document root for the virtual host. If you want to do the redirect, again, like there's very basic JavaScript redirect right there. And you could have that as a common blocked site website where it says it gets the window location host name and says that website, it will list it. So you go to Facebook, or it'll say facebook.com is a waste of time, is a waste of life, and we'll redirect you to Wikipedia instead. If you go to twitter.com, we'll say twitter.com is a waste of life, and redirect you to Wikipedia. That's the little JavaScript there, nothing special, just that's it right there. But there's a few more things that you might want to consider, because kids these days, they are intelligent. You know, they know computers very well. So you'd want to block, you'd want to configure your firewall, okay? To block VPN, except for the computers in your household that actually need it. You want to block DNS, except your own, so you don't want them speaking to third-party DNS servers. You only want your DNS server to have DNS access. And null routes. See, because most of these sites, like Facebook.com, can be accessed from their actual IP address directly. You don't have to type in their domain name to get them. Their web server will respond to their IP address, not just doesn't require the domain name. So what you can do for that, you can find out the actual IP address of Facebook. So we're just asking the root service to trace it for us. Oh, you know what? How did that happen? Okay, that's not good. Let's just try another. I'd like to see why that happened. Okay, so we'll just go. We'll ask Google what the IP address is for Facebook. Okay, so for example, they're giving us this address. Okay, so you can always use the Whois utility, and it'll tell you the subnet mask. Tell you the subnet, and here we have obvious Facebook, one of Facebook's networks. This is for Europe. Here we have Facebook's address by Whoising the IP that came back with the dig command, and you can see here this is just a /24 network, 254 usable hosts. 56 hosts total, just a /24 subnet. So what you do is just basically add a null route, or in this case through the loopback. You'd do this on your router or a proxy server, for example. If you have a proxy in your network or a router, you want to add a route to Oblivion. How this will hold up for performance testing, I don't know, but you'd probably also want to set up another firewall rule to immediately reset these connections. It's a whole different topic, but you want to send it back through your loopback interface. What do I do here? Oh, I missed the subnet mask. Right there. And you can see here that you have the network via your loopback. And if anyone would like to have help with this or discuss this further, you can contact me here. For those of you that know IRC, Freenode, you can get me on that name, or you can send me an email here. So if you want to work on something or get help with this, give me a shout and I'll do my best to help you out with it. Alright, have a good day.